The morning began like any other, with the usual hum of city traffic, the rush of commuters, and the whir of machinery in the distance. People shuffled about their daily routines, engrossed in their thoughts, their phones, their lives. But as the sun began to rise higher, a strange sense of anticipation hung in the air. It was subtle at first, a shift barely perceptible, like the first stirrings of an oncoming storm. By noon, it had become undeniable. Something was about to happen. It started in the smallest of ways, like a ripple across the surface of a calm sea. A message appeared on the digital billboards in cities around the world. At first, people thought it was a glitch, a malfunction in the system. But then they saw it again and again on every screen, every device. The message was simple, yet profound: silence. No one knew where it had come from, who had sent it, or why. It wasn't an order or a command. It was merely a suggestion, a call to stop, to think, to listen. The governments, the media, and the tech companies remained eerily quiet, as if the world had collectively agreed to remain still, to do nothing. And as the day wore on, people began to understand. At first, the response was cautious. People went about their routines, but with an unsettling unease. The streets remained unusually calm. There was no chatter, no honking horns, no advertisements blaring from loudspeakers. It was as though the entire world had pressed pause. And then, as the clock struck noon in every major city around the globe, something extraordinary happened. The people stopped. Without a word, without a single announcement or decree, millions of humans across continents ceased whatever they were doing. The bustling streets of New York City fell silent. In Tokyo, the trains stopped, their passengers stepping off and standing still. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower stood as a silent witness to the moment. And in every other city around the globe, from the bustling markets of Cairo to the quiet villages in the Amazon, every single person, without question, put down their phones, stepped away from their work, and stood still. It was not just a physical silence, but a mental one. People stopped talking, but also stopped thinking in the usual ways. They stopped the endless chatter in their minds, the constant worrying, the ceaseless planning. It was as though the entire human race collectively decided to stop and reflect on the state of the world, on the way they lived, on what it all meant. For hours, no one spoke a word. There were no protests, no demands, no speeches. No one moved. It wasn't a protest against authority or an attempt to push any political agenda. It was an unspoken declaration, a collective pause to consider the future of humanity, the state of the earth, and the direction they were headed. In that silence, something remarkable began to happen. The digital screens that had flashed advertisements for years now only displayed the words "listen" and "reflect." At first, the authorities scrambled. News stations tried to report on the phenomenon, but even they were rendered speechless, as the very act of speaking seemed too out of place. There was an unspoken understanding that the world had collectively chosen to disconnect from the noise, from the demands, and from the usual chaos of modern life. It wasn't until the sun began to set that the first whispers of conversation began again. At first, it was hesitant, a single voice, then two, then more. Conversations, once again, began, but they were different. People didn't speak about their usual concerns or their daily lives. They spoke of what had happened, of the silence, of how, for the first time in years, they had truly listened, to themselves, to each other, and to the world. Some spoke of the peace they felt in the stillness, others of the weight of the reflection. Some asked how this could be sustained, how they could avoid the return to the noise and distractions of modern life. But the question on everyone's mind was clear. Had the world just experienced something that could change the course of human history? As the day drew to a close, the message on the screens around the world changed. It was no longer just silence. It now read, "What will you do next?" It was a question that resonated deeply with every human who had participated. The silence had been a wake-up call, a moment to step outside of the rush, outside of the endless cycle of noise, and reflect on what truly mattered. In the days that followed, things slowly returned to normal, but the world had changed. There was a collective awareness that hadn't been there before, a shared understanding that humanity had the power to choose how to move forward. People were more present with each other, more mindful of their actions and words. Technology, which once seemed like an insurmountable force, now seemed like a tool to be used with more care. The silence had done its work. It had shown humanity the power of pause, the importance of reflection, and the strength that can be found in stillness. The day had started like any other, but it ended with humanity taking its first collective breath in a long, long time. And when they chose to speak again, it was with more purpose, more clarity, and more unity than ever before. And in the quiet aftermath, the world realized that sometimes the most powerful message isn't one that's spoken at all, it's the one that's left in the silence. As the days passed, the effects of Earth's collective silence continued to reverberate across the globe. People, still carrying the memory of that strange and powerful day, found themselves less hurried, more reflective. Conversations that would once have been dominated by the usual hustle and bustle, politics, business, entertainment, shifted to deeper topics. People began to talk about the environment, about the future of the planet, about their children and the legacy they wished to leave behind. What had once been a society obsessed with progress now began to consider the cost of that progress. The immediate effects were visible everywhere. In cities, once thriving shopping malls now saw fewer visitors, as people began to question their consumerist habits. Public spaces that had been crowded with advertisements and constant distractions began to focus more on nature, art, and meaningful human connections. Schools started introducing mindfulness practices to help students focus on understanding the world around them, not just absorbing information. There was a collective return to more personal, face-to-face interactions. Perhaps the most striking change occurred in the political landscape. World leaders who had once been at odds with each other began to have open, honest dialogues about global issues. The silence had stripped away the noise of egos, of politics, of the rush to be heard above others. Countries came together in a way no one had expected, agreeing to work toward shared goals: climate change, the preservation of natural resources, poverty alleviation, things that had once seemed so distant from each other, now brought into focus by the quiet reflection of that day. But not everything was seamless. While many embraced the shift, some resisted it. Corporations, whose survival depended on constant consumption and noise, tried to return things to the old ways, launching campaigns designed to reintroduce the rush and distraction of daily life. Some governments attempted to downplay the significance of the silent day, focusing instead on returning to business as usual, but the changes were undeniable. People had seen a different way of being, and they didn't want to go back to the constant din they had once lived with. The silence had given humanity the opportunity to reconnect with what mattered most. In some places, it sparked a return to older, simpler traditions, community gatherings, local farming, and quieter lifestyles. In others, it fueled technological innovations aimed not at advancing speed or quantity, but at enhancing quality of life, sustainability, and mental well-being. Smart cities began to adopt systems that promoted peace and quiet, turning down the volume on their bustling, fast-paced lives, allowing for moments of stillness amidst the urban rush. But as the months passed, it became clear that the true power of that silence had not been in the act itself, but in what it inspired afterward. People had finally realized the importance of their collective voice, what they chose to speak about, and how they chose to speak it. The silence had given humanity the space to ask deep questions, and those questions led to profound answers. As the world moved forward, it did so with a newfound understanding. The day the Earth chose silence was remembered not as a strange anomaly, but as a turning point, a moment in time when humanity recognized its ability to pause, reflect, and change. It wasn't about rejecting technology or progress, but about finding a balance, learning to wield the tools of modern life with the wisdom of silence. The last message that had appeared on screens worldwide, "What will you do next?" was now being answered slowly but surely by people across the globe. And the answers were powerful. Answers that came not from a place of noise or haste, but from a place of deep, thoughtful silence. In the end, the world didn't just choose silence. It chose to listen, to each other, to the planet, and to the deeper call of what it means to be human in a rapidly changing world. And though the silence itself was over, the message it carried lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had experienced it. The power of that day, the unspoken bond it created, was something humanity would carry with them forever, as a reminder that sometimes, to move forward, one must first stop and listen.